So, dear listeners, you're going to have to bear with me on this one. Just as I fleshed out my mother for context in these stories, I feel like I've got to deal with the elephant in the room, namely me and addiction. So, it's hard to remember the kind of kid I was before I contracted spinal meningitis as a 10-year-old. Me pulling those stitches out of my dead grandfather's mouth would indicate I wasn't a regular guy. But when I contracted spinal meningitis as a 10-year-old, and it should have killed me. But instead, I spent months in and out of comas. And I came home a week later and I'd contracted encephalitis and even worse inflammation of the brain, and spent another couple months in an intensive care unit, moving in and out of comas, hallucinations, high fevers, seizures, delirium. It was like practice for the DTs. And so they were both terrible, terrible diseases. And no neurologist I've been to since has ever heard of anyone who contracted them one after the other, much less survived them. One of them even told me that if you took an MRI of my brain, all the meninges, the folds on the outside, would be smooth, so that inside my head I've actually got like a burnished brown Nazi helmet. And and what do I remember of it all? Blessedly very little. In those occasions when I was conscious, family members would be there wearing masks, and I remember that my ass was completely black from all the shots they gave me there. But here's the main point. When I came to for the last time, I wasn't paralyzed or deaf or crazy. Well, that one's probably debatable. Or blind. I just couldn't believe how slow everyone around me was. I literally came back to slug world. Those viruses had burned a racetrack behind my eyes. So in my brain, I just had this permanent starter's gun. I'd gone in a reasonably normal kid and came out a buzzed adrenaline junkie. One of those neurologists speculated that during all those fevers, my hippocampus had actually rewired itself. But the point was, after that, I could never do anything fast enough. So the result of that is, before my eyes gave out a few years ago, I'd read on average at least a book a day all my life. Probably more, because I'm a very high-speed reader. Hell, I used to even read fiction and nonfiction books in the bars. So, myself, I never saw anyone else who read in bars. And I also think fast, draw fast, walk fast, and made my living for years as the world's fastest typist, typing over 200 words a minute when word processors came along. So I was a blur. Now, pot and meditation have helped with that, but I've always been insanely impatient. If there's one thing I could change in my life, that'd be it. So I set the stage. Fast forward 10 years. I'm working in that box plant before I took that draft physical. And, I'm taking, I get stacks, 25 boxes, and I tie a string around them. No one had ever seen anyone do it faster. So we got 10-minute breaks, and I'm sitting there in the break room smoking, and I noticed that AA has added this little box there with pamphlets in it. So I take the pamphlet down and I quickly read it cover to cover. And then I look at the back, and this is, it was a list of 10 things that would indicate that you are probably alcoholic. And one of the first of them was, you've had 3 or more blackouts. And I remember that moment to this day, maybe the most graphic memory of my life. just this indelible Polaroid in my brain because I thought, that can't be right. It said 3 blackouts. Time stopped because at that point in my life, at 19, I drank alcohol 5 times and blacked out every time. I was 5 for 5. I was slugging 1,000. I figured everybody blacked out when they drank. So I looked at that pamphlet again and thought, well, this is impossible. And the guys on either side of me were heavy boozers. So I asked the guy on my left, I said, have you ever had a blackout? And he goes, nah, that's for fucking lightweights. That's for losers. And then I turned to the other guy and I said, well, what about you? Have you had one? And he said, well, I had one in high school when I first drank. Never again, thank God. And I thought, uh-oh. So a month later, after I flunked the draft physical, I'm back in the Bay Area with buddies I grew up with, all of whom are heavy boozers. It was a cocktail culture down there. And I get drunk on beer and whiskey. And at midnight, ironically, not in a blackout for the first time, I'm outside throwing up in the bushes when I think, this feels right. This fits like a glove. When I'm shit-faced, the racetrack behind my eyes shuts down. And, I feel as close to normal as I'm going to get. Well, kind of normal. So I've lived my life by 3 maxims. 1, create something you're proud of every day. 2, life is an experiment, so treat it like one. And 3, fuck everything. I could be dead tomorrow. Every single decision I've made in my life has come down to that last one. And it was no different with alcoholism. The 2 mesh perfectly, in fact, because the way I drank and drugged, I could be dead tomorrow, became a self-fulfilling prophecy. I looked at alcoholism as an opportunity, in other words. So instead of worrying about it or trying to stay sober, why not take advantage of it? Why not ride that whirlwind till I was dead or sober? So the next morning, I had a 6-pack for breakfast, and the journey began.
Oh, God.